Hello and welcome to Dice Tabletop. My name is Chris and today we are going to be working on the Volcano Canon. Now this is the original piece that I wanted to use on the model, but unfortunately, as you can see, I did drop it and I broke it. I lost some of the pieces and it basically could not go back together. But it is just as well because we really need a test piece now to figure out how I'm going to do it on the final version. Now just to give you guys some idea as to the actual scale of this, I have a Chaos Marine here, Morty, and then you've got the Volcano Cannon. It is huge. So let's go over some of the things that we need to do now on our test piece. Originally I made a hole at the end of the barrel. It was my idea to fit one of these LED housings in like I did in the eyes and run an LED down the front, but I've since changed my mind on that. I need to now cut out the inside of these so I can put a battery holder in it and get access to put some of the electronics inside. As well as that, we also now need to figure out where the magnets are going to go because I need this to be detachable so I can take everything in and out that's hiding inside. We've also got the elbow joint and the upper arm. Now I originally had an idea that I was going to run a wire all the way through the torso of the body and down through into the arms, but I've since got a much better idea now in running these in individual circuits are going to hide inside the weapons. So my first thought was that if I cut these off, what I can do now is I can have an interchangeable part that can be swapped between all of the weapons, and then this upper arm I can just glue straight onto the piston that's on the torso. Now I am going to be doing a lot of work with the Dremel on this, so I've made sure that I've got my trusty dust mask on and there's some good ventilation in the room as well. So we're going to be using one of the grinding blades now to get some really nice straight big lines to block cut lots of things out, but just as I went to use it I realised that I've managed to break it somehow, so these are incredibly delicate it seems. Once I changed that over, this was just a simple matter now of going around. These were pre-made holes within the files. You can print little pins that go in between to help the weapon all stick together when you glue it. But because this is hollow and we want to be using the inside of it, we've got to get this all cut out. Now I could feel that this was still really stuck to something on the inside, so I came in now with the drill bit and I used that kind of like a machinist would with some metal just to really cut around all of those outsides and free this center bit so we can get it removed. Once I could feel that I started to have a little bit of play in that, I came back in with some snips and just really attacked it and gored it all out. Now that I've got a good idea of what I'm doing on this and I'm feeling confident, I'm going to go straight ahead now and repeat the process on the back part. Now this I do not intend to reprint, this is going to be final and go on the model, so if I screw it up here, I really am not going to be happy. So the first thing for me to do now is to mark out an area that I need to cut. I need to make this as small as possible. We want to leave as much room around the outside, so that's where we're going to put the magnets in. So I cut out roughly where I think these pinholes are going to sort of end. Using the drill then, kind of like how you would with a jigsaw, I put some guide holes in and came in between those with the abrasive disc. Luckily I didn't get the same issue that I did on the barrel with these pinholes. This center section moved really freely. So again, I gored this out with the snips, and then I could see that there were these residual parts left over. So it was a matter now that I just needed to come in and break those out. Once I had done that, there was a lot of supports that were left inside this. So it did take a while to get this all free on the inside, but we can see now we've got a really nice cavity that is going to fit our battery perfectly. Before it can fit snugly into its new home though, we do need to make these edges just slightly wider. The sandpaper attachment made quick work of this, and when that was done, the battery holder fitted in perfectly. Next up, it's paint glove time, and that's because we're going to be working on the barrel. Now I printed these in transparent resin, but for some reason I cannot get them to stop smelling. This is part of the reason why I haven't been working on the plasma gun just yet. That thing, I need to get in there and I need to wash it out properly. Something is not cured properly on the inside. So that's part of the reason why this video was delayed. I really didn't feel too safe working with these until they sort of just stopped stinking the way that they did. But this Volcano barrel, that has got all of the fumes now out of it. I originally thought that it was slightly a different scale to the plastic one. The transparent resin kind of gives a different look to it, but no, lining them all up, it was the exact same fit. So being the idiot that I am, I didn't record opening up this actual section here, but now that we've got access to the inside, we can see all of the supports that are left in there from the print. So I've just come in with a brass rod and break all of those up, so we've got a nice clean line all the way through it. With that completed, we can now move on to designing a little circuit to go inside it now so that we can control some LEDs. Now, I've got a good selection for some other weapons in the future, but today we're going to be using orange, As well as that, we've just got some good wire, some connectors, an Tiny 85, I'll talk about that in a moment. We got some heat shrink so that we can protect our solders, as well as a battery holder. Now this little mess is what I showed off at the end of my previous video that we were using to control the little blue filament. So this is an Tiny 85. It's a little programmable chip that you can do via Arduino, and what it enables me to do is control the brightness of an LED as a variable as opposed to just on or off as it would be with a switch. So we've got the positive that goes to the 5-volt rail on this development board. We've also then got the negative that goes to the ground on it, and then to control the LED we're going to be using I think it's pin 0. That is going to enable us to send a controlled signal up to the LED, and then we're connecting the ground of that back to the ground that we've got on the board. Now I want a lot more modularity with this than I have with my little test circuit, so the first thing I'm going to do is put one side of a connector and attach this now to the battery pack. Now remembering your comments from my previous atrocious attempt at soldering, I tinned the wire beforehand. What this does is this pre-soaks the wire with solder, so all I now need to do is come back in just with my soldering iron and melt those two together, as opposed to trying to need an extra set of arms to hold everything in place while I then touch the solder to it. Now there's still vast room for improvement in my skills, but this was far less painful than it was previously, so thank you to everyone who helped me with that. Then once that is soldered, we're coming over and we are heating up now our shrink wrap just to make sure that that doesn't move or come apart at all. And there we have it, one battery pack ready to be connected to anything. And as always now, before we go too far and realise we've made a mistake, we're just giving this quick little test. So let's talk a little bit more about this Tiny 85. Specifically what I've got here is called a development board. So this is the chip attached to a USB interface so that I can just plug it straight in and I can code directly to the chip. You can buy the chip individually, but if you do that, you're still going to need a development board anyway to program it. So I may as well just go straight ahead and buy the 2-in-1. This also has some really nice little headers, as you can see there, for me to easily attach the wires to and know which pins are doing what. Now these boards weren't too expensive, I think it was 3 for just under £10 on Amazon. So looking at my test board that I've managed to program and get working, all we need to do now is just do a neater job of replicating how it's been wired. Starting off then, we need to work on the other end of this connector that's going to connect to the battery terminal, so we are putting the red positive to the 5-volt and the black to the ground. Now one thing that I didn't give much consideration to is the angles that these connectors were going to be pointing off of the board at once they are soldered, but now that that's done we can plug it all in just to make sure that it works, and as we can see here the board lights up. Next we are going to be wiring up the connector that is going to go to the LEDs, so I need to be putting the red positive on pin 0 and the black ground to the ground that we have on the board. And there we have it. It's not pretty, but now that that's complete, we can start working now on the LEDs that are going to connect into the board. These naturally will attach to the other end of this connector. But before we go any further, it is time for another test. So we turn it on here, we should now start getting a blinking LED, which we do. And now we can test the LED itself, which matches the pulse, so we know that it is sending a signal appropriately. Now that the first part of this little circuit is all complete, this is going to live in the back part of the weapon. We can go ahead and test just to see how well it all fits in there, and then we can do some measuring now to see just how long we need to make our wire for the LEDs that go into the barrel. As you can see, we've got absolutely loads of room to tuck all of this neatly away inside. Battery pack and board now in a rough position where they would sit when this is all mounted to the Titan. I can see where the connector is now. We have our LEDs in place as well as the length of the opposite side of the connector, and I can just figure out roughly how much extra wire I'm going to need now to put in between the two. With that done, I'm grabbing 2 orange LEDs which I'm going to connect together just for that extra brightness inside of the weapon. With those two now connected, we can attach the extra wire that we need for length, putting some heat shrink tubing then over the solders to give them some extra protection. Once both of the wires were attached, I then wanted to keep this all really solid together, so I came back in with a larger piece of heat shrink and put the entire little concoction inside there. There we have our LEDs all together. Again, it's not too pretty, but that is nice and sturdy and is going to do the purpose perfectly. Lastly then, all we need to do is attach this now to the other side of the connector, which is going to attach to our control board. Which when done, looks like this. Right, so now we can go ahead and we can see that this is going to fit perfectly within the length of the barrel. I don't want it going down right to the end. It's just not going to look right if you see those LEDs pointing out. It's going to be too bright. So let's give this all another test now, putting it all together and seeing, hopefully, that it works. Which thankfully it does. The board does take a couple of seconds just to warm up and turn on, so that kept me in suspense. But thankfully we now know that this is working. So let's chuck it down the barrel of our transparent print and see just how well this glows. The first test I've done here is with all the lights off in the room. I think it's just the TV on in the background. But as you can see already, just from this flashing, this has a really nice glowing effect. You can see a concentration, a sort of heat towards the end of the barrel, and it's slowly dispersing up the gun as if that is cooling off. Turning the lights on now, you can still see that it's quite bright. This is a much closer example of how I am going to have it in the end. The heat is going to be much more concentrated just towards the end of the barrel. So next up, what I did is I didn't film this, but I jumped on the internet. I used some AI to help me write some Arduino code to have a firing effect that you will see later on. Now obviously I can't just go hiding all of that electronics in there. I'll never be able to turn it on or off or replace the battery or recode it or do anything. So we are going to magnetize these two pieces together. Now I hope this is going to explain sort of a bit better why I didn't do this magnet to magnet magnetization on all of the armor panels. I need to be really precise with this to keep all of everything in line. But I can afford to on this because it is a nice flat surface. When I'm working with the armor panels, because I'm going to have multiple different sets of armor, I need a wide surface area for my magnets on the armor to attach to. Doesn't make a bit more sense as you keep watching. So my first step with this was working on the back part of the weapon. I found 7 locations where I'd be able to attach a magnet. What I'm then going to do is magnetize one side first, use those magnets as markers, and I can transfer that imprint onto the barrel side so I know exactly where they line up. To start off then, we're coming in and making some pilot holes with a really small drill bit over all those marks that we've just made. There we have it, pilot holes complete. It is now a matter of repeating the same process as I did when I was magnetizing the armor first time around. We are coming in, drilling a slightly larger hole for our magnet, attaching it to a nice little bit of steel, putting some glue around it, and then just pushing that into the hole as necessary. One down, 6 to go. Magnets installed, it's time to give it a strength test. So we've just got a bit of sheet steel here, and my god, yes, this is definitely going to hold that barrel, no troubles at all. I can't even really flick this thing off, and you can see here, it's got quite a bit of pull to it. Next up then, we need to transfer this pattern onto the back of the barrel. And in order to do that easily, I'm just coming in with some white paint and I am dabbing this over the top of the magnets, making sure to get a really nice sort of high pull, the best that I can, without having it run everywhere. And then just being delicate, lining it all up the best that I can, come in and gently touch that barrel against those magnets, hopefully transitioning that imprint of the white, so I've got a loose idea of where my hole should be drilled, and that looks like it has worked perfectly. Once that's dried then, so I don't flick paint everywhere, we're coming in and we are drilling our pilot holes, and we are just simply repeating the process now exactly how we did previously, largening those holes and putting the magnets in. Moment of truth then, do these go together and is it strong? Yes and yes. I'm really happy with how this turned out. This lined up really well and the strength is incredible. That is really not going to go anywhere now that it is attached. It can happily be bumped, it can be knocked. You can put a little bit of force into it respectively before it comes apart. Now we do have one more thing that we need to do before we can move on and start painting it, and that is there has been quite a few supports that attach to the back part of this weapon during printing. That's nothing to do with the file at all, that is just me being stupid with the software unfortunately, so we're just going to go ahead and clean up some of these. Here we've got the result of that cleanup process. Now it does look like a bit more of a rough, chattered surface, but as we look down it here, they're pretty smooth there. It's mainly sort of pits and other things that have been pulled out as I've removed these supports. But we're not going to see too much of that. This is going to be underneath all that shoulder part, and once it's been primed, you won't notice it too much. Which means we're on to our last pieces to prep. This is the elbow and the upper arm section itself. Now the upper arm fits into a pin. What I'm going to end up doing is super gluing this to that pin. If you remember from the previous videos, I've left that so that it spins. And then what we're going to be doing is magnetizing this connection between the elbow and that upper arm. This means that I can take that elbow joint between any other weapon. But these don't fit together quite snugly, so I just come at them both with a piece of sandpaper on a flat surface. Once I've attacked both angles of that, they then go together much more neatly. Now that those two pieces line up much better, we can go ahead and start marking out where we're going to place these magnets. So putting it down on a nice flat surface to make sure that it doesn't move anywhere, I reckon I can fit 8 on here, and I'm going to need to I have all the strength possible to hold up that weapon. So I'm just marking up top to bottom, left to right, and then going sort of in between all of that, like all the points on a compass. Now it's time to follow the exact same process, so we're going to drill our pilot holes, followed by making those bigger and popping the magnets in.
Nice.
There we have the magnets installed, they're all sitting nice and flush. Next we can go up and repeat the process, dot all of these with white, and transfer that imprint onto the other part. I unfortunately put a little bit too much paint on in parts, but it doesn't matter so long as we just aim for the center of all of these dots. Here it is now that we've got those 8 magnets in, so let's test it out. How does this fit together? And again, this is a really nice, strong connection. So everything is magnetized and prepped. We can now move on and prime it all. We're going to come and do the barrel separately. We need to mask off the tip of that just so I can retain some of that clear transparent resin to get a nice glow effect through. Now, I am not very good at printing with transparent resin at all, but I didn't really take many of the precautions necessary to ensure a good print. It's not necessary to be exactly perfectly clear, I just need something to help emanate light through. But something that I can do to improve it is to polish the surface ever so slightly. So I just want to give a little experiment here and see how Autosol works out. This is a metal polish, so I just put this on a rag, made sure to really rub it in, and then put a cotton bud down in the center and finally polished all that off with a little rotary bit. That did actually make a little bit of difference, and then later on I'm going to come and put some gloss varnish over the top. That really then helps add to the transparency. Finally then, the barrel got a good coating as well, and it was amazing how much more I had to actually put on to cover clear resin. So here we are, and now we're ready to start doing the metal effect. We're doing this the exact same way that I have done in the previous videos as well, so let's give this a really good sloppy dry brush of lead belcher. Dry brush applied, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. It's a really great metal look to this. So we now need to move on and start picking out all the bronze accents that we want across it. So we're using Balthasar Gold for this. There were some quite obvious parts I wanted to pick out, especially on the upper arm and the elbow joint in bronze. But when we got to the weapon then, I wasn't too sure necessarily how far to go with it. There were parts where I thought I might have been doing it a little over the top. But it was just a simple matter of trusting the process and letting it all come together right at the end. And here is that end. I'm really happy now with how all these bronze pieces turned out. Really adds so much more extra character to this weapon. So next up is going to be weathering this with the rushed streaks, but before we can do that, I have to revisit my arch nemesis and paint more rivets. Nearly forgot to paint the pipes on this thing, so they get a base coat of black. All of that caught up then, let's get the streaking grind done. So we're not doing this in any different way that we've done in the previous videos, but for a quick recap, just in case you haven't seen those, what we're doing is thinning this down with some mineral spirits, putting a real sloppy wash of that all over everything. Then once we've dried that off with a hairdryer, we're coming back in then with some clean mineral spirit and a sponge, dabbing it all off, and that's going to leave us with a really nice rusted effect at the end. On to our final job now, which is to remove the masking tape off the end, and as you can see, this is going to create now a really clean line where we've had that masking tape to where we've been painting. We want to break that up a little bit, so in order to do that, I've just come in with some isopropyl alcohol to soften up some of that paint around the edges. Once that is then softened, I'm agitating it with the end of a nail file. So I'm just creating a really nice roughed up surface now, just to help break some of the light through when we get the LED all fitted in. Now, one trick to getting some shine and transparency back into transparent resin prints is to apply a gloss varnish over the top of it. So I've just ever so slightly thinned this down with some water, and I put 2 thick coats of this on. Once that was dry, that was the Volcano Canon all finished, so let's assemble it and see how it looks. And here we have our glow effect under full lighting. You can see that is still really vivid, and I am quite happy with how this has turned out. The program that I've written to run on this chip, so what it is intended to do is mimic firing the gun and then slowly cooling off, as you can see here, and then the cycle will repeat itself. Now I'm going to really have to sit down and play about with some of the timings that I've got on this. The delay in the cool off I think is a little bit too long. I could maybe add a flicker into it, maybe to add a little bit more of a random variance. I also think there needs to be a little bit of a time delay between it cooling off and firing again. Here I've played about a little bit with the position of the LEDs inside the weapon, and this is where it needs to be. Sitting slightly further back, getting that glow really further up the barrel, making it super bright towards the edge, but you can see there's a much more natural transition now as it leads into that really thick metal collar around the end. Which means all that we need to do now to wrap this video up is get this attached to the elbow joint and the arm. So I spent a little time thinking about how exactly I was going to pin this. I didn't want anything that was going to be too stuck in place and make it too hard to remove. As you know, there's going to be a lot of weapons on this, need to make my life easy. So I came up with just using a simple M4 bolt. This is a 35mm length one. I do need a 40mm in total, but as you'll see, there's a happy little accident that happens as I'm drilling my holes here. That means that as I get this 40mm, I won't need to put a nut on the other end. So what we're going to need to do is create some center pilot holes now in that elbow joint, and then we'll put that elbow joint back onto the gun and drill straight through those so that we know that they're all lined up. After those pilot holes are drilled, it is a matter now of using a thin carbon fiber rod just to test how straight this is. Now, considering that I'm doing this all by eye, I was very happy with how all this turned out. As you can see here, this is really nice, straight and parallel. That spins absolutely freely, no resistance in any direction. And if we line it up against that straight edge at the bottom, you'll see they're parallel. So let's go now in and widen these holes. We're just using a 3mm drill bit for this. But what with it being an M4 bolt, that 3mm hole is not going to be big enough. Thankfully though, I've got a really nice conical shaped attachment for the rotary which I use to enlarge the hole that perfectly matches the diameter of the M4. It's just a matter now of repeating that process on the other side, and we could test just how straight this bolt goes through. And as we can see, although it doesn't fit all the way through right now, that's why I need the 40mm one, that is going to work perfectly. So we can now use this as a guide to see where we need to be putting our hole in the back end of this gun. So this was a matter of putting that elbow joint on, firmly holding it in one position, and then gently dabbing a mark with the rotary either side in that opening that we've made. With those center marks in place, we're following the exact same process now of pilot hole, 3mm drill, and then expanding that with our conical grinder. And I did have a slight panic when I first tried to put the bolt through, but it turned out there were some supports left in this upper connecting bit. So I broke those up, and as you can see, that goes straight through perfectly. So let's put it all together, and this is when I discovered something a little bit interesting. So what you're going to see here is a recording of my visible confusion, but I've managed to misalign something just by a millimeter or so, and it's inadvertently created a thread. As you can see here, I couldn't figure out why it wasn't going all the way through, and then I put it on, and miraculously, we now have a threaded surface. So what this now means is as soon as I get my 40mm bolt, I don't need to put a nut or anything on the other side. I can simply screw this into place, colour the end of the bolt, and you'll never know that it's there. Now naturally we will still have the head of it, but that is going to be facing towards the inside, and I'm also going to buy a smaller diameter headed one as well, so it will fit neatly within that recess. So fingers crossed, you just won't see this at all when it's all done. However, I doubt I'm going to be so lucky on the plasma gun. So here we have it, this is all done, this is all complete, let's assemble it and have a little talk now about what is to come in the next episode. So of course, as I mentioned, I was really not happy with the state that the resin was in for the Sunfury Plasma Annihilator. I have since been working a little bit more on that. I've been able to clean it a lot more on the inside, and I'm a lot more satisfied now that it's safe to work with, basically. There's going to be a lot of repeat processes in that next video. I mean, the ARM process is going to be exactly the same, so I'm going to skip all of that. It should be a much faster paced video next time. We're just going to get the Sunfury, I'll show you a little bit of what I'm doing in regards to how I'm going to make the electronics, just get that built, get that painted, and then both of these guns could go on, and we can call the first phase of the Warlord Titan officially complete. Now, one thing that I am interested in is, of course, these can be completely programmed however you want. So I want to put this out to you guys. If any of you understand C++, Arduino coding, I would love to see what you come up with for these weapons, and then I'll do a video loading them all up and testing all of your guys' little programs. So I think I've talked enough now in this video. I need to be cracking on and getting that Sunfury finished and out to you all. So thank you ever so much for watching this video. If you did like it, please drop a like down below and subscribe if you're not already. As I say, in the next video, we will be finishing this Warlord Titan. So I'm sure you're going to want to see the culmination of 13 months of work on this. Don't miss out, and I'll see you soon.